I have buried more friends in red dust than most men ever meet, and I have done it under a sky that the Veil believed still belonged to them. That belief is the whole of this story. They were wrong about the sky, and they were wrong about us, and they had 30,000 years to learn how wrong, and they did not use a single one of them. My name is Halden Reese. For 41 years I was the warden of Ochre Station, which sat on the high dust plain above the place we called the cairn, and which existed for one reason that everyone who served there understood and almost no one off-world ever did. We were the latch on a door. We were not the door. We were not even the lock. We were the small iron latch that tells you, when your hand finds it in the dark, that the door is still shut and still holds. The cairn was theirs first. I want to be honest about that from the start because the whole strength of what we became rests on it. 30,000 years before I drew breath, when our kind still huddled in river valleys and counted itself lucky to outlast a hard winter, the Veil passed through this system the way a wealthy man walks through a field he intends to buy. They found it unremarkable. A wet world, a red world, a banded giant and its moons, a belt of rubble. They were not interested in any of it for itself. They were interested in the lane it sat on, the long quiet road between richer places, and they did what their kind had always done with the way stations on their roads. They sank a marker into it, a claim stone, a buried thing the size of a town, dropped into the Martian crust and capped over, that broadcast to anyone with the right ears a single cold sentence in their cold tongue. This belongs to the Veil, and the Veil will return. Then they left. They had 100 such markers seeding 100 such systems, and they were patient the way only an empire can afford to be patient. They would come back when it suited them, on the slow circuit of their reclamations, and they would harvest whatever the road needed and move on. The wet red world with the huddling apes was not even a footnote. They did not bother to record us. Why would they record the weeds growing over a stone you have already claimed? We found the stone 11,000 years later. Give or take. By then we had crossed the gap to Mars on our own legs, and the digging machines turned up something under the ochre that was not iron and was not stone, and answered no question we knew how to ask. It took us 4 centuries to understand what we were looking at. It took us 4 centuries more to make it speak. And when it finally spoke, it told us the cold sentence, and it told us the lane, and it told us, in the dead grammar of a people who had filed us under nothing, exactly who would be coming back, and roughly when, and precisely how little they expected to find. That is the thing the Veil never accounted for, in all their long certainty. They left us a letter explaining that they owned us. They did not imagine that a possession could learn to read. I came up through the picket service the ordinary way. I was not a clever man, and I have never pretended otherwise. I could hold a line, I could keep a watch, I could make tired people do necessary things in the cold, and on Mars that is most of the job. I made warden at 39, which is young, and I held it past the age when most men asked to be relieved, because the work suited the shape of me, and because I could not imagine a sky over my head that was not the Martian sky, thin and pink, and shot through with the moving lights of the things we had built to wait. You should understand what Mars had become, because the Veil did not, and the not understanding is the hinge the whole age turned on. It was a bastion, not a colony, not a research post, not the marginal frontier I am sure the Veil still pictured if they pictured it at all. The dust plains carried gun emplacements sunk so deep that the maps showed them as geology. The 2 small moons had been hollowed and packed until they were less moons than magazines. Above the equator hung the rings, 3 of them, vast lattices of armor and weapon and sensor that turned on the world's axis and never slept, and they were the small installations, the forward ones, the ones we put on Mars precisely, because Mars was the road the Veil had marked and would walk again. The real strength was sunward. The real strength was Earth, and Earth's high orbits, and the long fortified reach between, and I will come to that because the Veil came to it too, and it is the place where their certainty died. But Mars was mine, Ochre Station and its 1,100 souls, and the cairn beneath us that we had guarded without a single break in the line for longer than most species manage to stay alive. 1,100 souls is not many. We were the tripwire, and tripwires are meant to be thin. The men and women who came up to serve under me knew it when they took the posting. We did not pretend otherwise to each other. There is a particular quality to the discipline of people who know they are the thin part of the wall, and I have never found its equal anywhere else, and I do not expect to. The warning came on an ordinary watch, which is how these things always come. I was on the deep floor that night, down where the cairn's voice was loudest, doing the thing I did most mornings before the station woke, listening. The marker had never stopped broadcasting in all the time we held it. We had learned long ago not to silence it. A silenced marker tells its makers that something has gone wrong with their property. A marker that hums its cold sentence into the dark tells them the field is still empty and the weeds are still weeds. So we let it sing, and we listened to it sing, and on that morning it was not alone. There was an answer in the dark. I had read about the answer all my life. Every warden does. It is the first thing they teach you on the deep floor and the last thing they make sure you have not forgotten before they let you hold the watch. There is a tone the marker gives when it hears its own makers approaching, a handshake, a recognition, the stone calling out to the fleet that owns it. We had recordings of it, simulations of it, drills built around it. I had heard it 10,000 times in training and never once for real, and I had half believed, the way every warden half believes, that I would hand the latch to my successor without ever hearing it at all. I heard it that morning. The marker beneath my feet woke up and began, for the first time in 30,000 years, to answer something that was answering back. I did not feel fear, which surprised me, and which I have thought about often since. I felt the way you feel when a thing you have rehearsed your whole life finally arrives, a kind of terrible settling, a sense of the floor coming up to meet the foot that has been hanging in the air for 41 years. I keyed the alert that we had kept ready and never sent, the one that did not go to the station first, but went sunward to the inner system, to the great fortified deep around Earth that we existed to give warning to. 3 words, in a code older than any language now spoken, that meant, the road is walked. Then I went up to wake my people, and to begin the part of the work that the thin part of the wall is for. The veil came in slow. That is the thing the recordings never capture, the thing I had not understood from any drill. They were not in a hurry. They had never in their long history needed to hurry. They came down the lane the way they had marked it, in good order, with the unbothered confidence of landlords arriving to inspect a property they have not visited in a while and do not expect to find improved. We watched them cross the outer dark for 2 days before they were close enough to resolve, and in those 2 days I learned more about the veil from the manner of their approach than we had pieced together from 11,000 years of reading their stone. They were certain. It came off them like heat. The formation they held was not a war formation, it was a procession. They had not deployed their screen, not spread their pickets, not done any of the careful things a fleet does when it expects to meet resistance, because they did not expect to meet resistance. They expected to arrive at a buried stone on a forgotten red world, confirm that the field was still empty, take what the lane required and move on down the road. We were a checkmark on a long list. They had come, I understood, not to conquer Mars but to file it, to update a 30,000-year-old record, to stamp the claim renewed, and to be on their way to the next stone before the dust settled. The shape of them, when they resolved, was beautiful in the way that very old and very sure things are beautiful. Their ships were not built like ours. Ours are armor and angle. Brute fact made flat and hard. Theirs were long and pale and ribbed, like something grown rather than made, and they moved with a smoothness that suggested they had never in their history been required to move otherwise. The lead vessel, the one the marker reached for, the one that answered the stone's cold sentence with a colder one of its own, was a great pale length of a thing, and across its flank, in the script we had spent 4 centuries learning to read, it carried a name. We translated the name as the Unbroken Claim. I have thought about that name a great deal in the years since. It was not arrogance exactly. It was simpler and worse than arrogance. It was a statement of fact as they understood the facts. The claim had been laid. The claim had not been challenged. Therefore the claim was unbroken. They were not boasting. They were reading their own marker back to themselves and finding it accurate, and they had no reason in the universe to suspect that the marker had been read by other eyes and answered in other rooms for longer than their crews had been alive. I want to be fair to them. They were not fools. An empire does not hold roads across the long dark by being foolish. They were simply working from a record, and their record was 30,000 years old, and they had never once in those 30,000 years thought to check whether the weeds had grown into something that could read. The first thing they did when they were close enough was hail the cairn directly. Not us. They did not see us, not yet, not as anything that mattered. They hailed the stone. They sent it the renewal sequence, the formal repossession, the cold grammar that meant the owner has returned and the claim is reasserted, and any presence on the claimed ground is hereby noted as transient and removable. It was a property transaction. It was paperwork, conducted at the speed of light across a gulf of stars, addressed to a buried town-sized stone that we had been quietly tending like a grave. We did not answer it. That was the standing order, 30,000 years old, refined by 10,000 wardens before me. You do not answer the renewal. You do not announce yourself. You let them come and you let them commit, and you give the inner system every hour you can buy with your silence. The thin part of the wall does not shout. It waits to be leaned on. So we waited to be leaned on. I gathered my 1100 on the night before contact, the whole of Ochre Station, on the deep floor where the cairn sang, because there was no other room that would hold us all, and because I wanted them near the thing we kept. I am not a man of speeches. I told them the truth, which is the only thing I have ever found worth telling people who may be about to die. I told them that the warning had gone sunward and been received, that the inner deep was already moving, that everything we existed for was about to happen, and that our part in it was small and hard and necessary. I told them we were the latch. I told them that the door behind us was real and strong and held by hands far greater than ours, and that our one job was to let the men and women in the sunward dark know exactly when the veil's hand touched the latch, and to make that touch cost something, so that no one downstream could mistake what was coming for anything other than what it was. I did not tell them we would survive it. I have never lied to people in the cold, and I was not going to start at the end. A young technician, her name was Sarah Vey, no relation to the things in the sky, just a hard coincidence of sound that we had all stopped noticing, asked me the question that the young always ask and the old have stopped asking. She asked whether it was worth it, whether the latch mattered when the door was so much stronger than the latch, when the inner deep could surely meet the veil with or without our hour of warning. I told her the truth about that too. I told her that the door was strong because the latch had held for 30,000 years without one single failure, and that the strength of a thing held for 30,000 years is not separate from the holding. The inner deep was ready because it had never once been allowed to forget. And it had never been allowed to forget because every morning for 30,000 years, someone on this red world had gone down to the deep floor and listened, and confirmed the door was shut, and would have shouted if it were not. The watch was the strength. There was no strength behind the watch that did not pass through the watch first. We were not the small part of a great thing. We were the place where the great thing touched the ground. She seemed satisfied with that. I hope she was. She did not live to tell me whether she stayed satisfied, and that is a debt I carry, along with the others. They leaned on the latch at dawn, Martian dawn, the thin pink coming up over the dust, while the great pale length of the unbroken claim hung in our sky like a second and unwelcome moon. They did not bombard us. I want to record that precisely, because it tells you everything about how they understood the morning. They did not bombard us because to bombard us would have been to acknowledge us as a thing requiring force, and we were not, in their reading, a thing requiring force. We were transient presence on claimed ground, hereby noted as removable. They sent down a removal. It came as a single descending craft, escorted but unhurried, a landing party rather than a strike, beings in pale ribbed armor, tall and many-limbed and graceful, walking down out of the red dawn with the air of inspectors arriving to clear a squatter off a parcel they had owned since before the squatter's grandmother was born. They came down near the cairn's surface cap, which they knew to the meter, because it was on their map, because they had drawn the map. They came to confirm their stone and clear their weeds. They did not raise their weapons as they came. Why would you raise a weapon at a weed? We were not weeds. I will not dress up what happened on the surface that morning into something it was not. It was not a great battle. The thin part of the wall does not fight great battles. It fights the small, terrible kind, the kind that is over in minutes and decides nothing on its own and everything in the aggregate. We met their removal party at the cairn's cap with the men and women of Ochre Station's surface companies, and we did not let them touch the stone, and the cost of not letting them touch the stone was paid in the only currency the surface ever takes. We held the cap. We held it through the morning and into the thin red noon. The veil learned in the space of those hours that the weeds on their red world had teeth, and they were astonished. I could read it even through the armor, in the way their graceful certainty broke into something stiffer and more careful. They were astonished the way you are astonished when the furniture bites your hand. But astonishment is not defeat, and a landing party is not a fleet, and I had not gathered my 1,100 to win on the surface. I had gathered them to buy hours and to make the touching of the latch unmistakable. We did both. By the time the veil pulled their bloodied removal party back up into the pale belly of the unbroken claim, every clock in the sunward dark knew to the minute when the veil's hand had closed on the latch, and knew it had closed hard, and knew the latch had drawn blood before it gave. That was when the veil stopped seeing us as paperwork, and started, far too late, to look. And looking, they finally saw the sky. Here is the thing about the inner system that the veil's 30,000-year-old record did not contain, the thing that no buried marker could have told them, the thing they could only learn by coming inside our reach and lifting their eyes from their stone. It was full. It was not the empty road they had marked. It was not the quiet way station between richer places. Somewhere in the long while they had been away, the weeds on the red world had crossed to the wet world and the wet world's high deeps, and had not stopped, and had filled the inner dark with the patient work of a people who knew, for 30,000 years, that the owners were coming back. I watched it happen from the deep floor of Ochre Station, on the screens we kept tied into the sunward net, in the hours after our surface companies had paid for our warning. I watched the veil turn their attention inward for the first time, inbound past Mars toward the wet world they had filed and forgotten, expecting, I am certain they were still expecting, a few orbital scraps, a marginal colony, the predictable small clutter of a species that had managed to leave its cradle but not to matter. I watched them sweep their pale, graceful sensors sunward. And I watched the sky answer. It did not answer with fire, not at first. That is the part I want you to understand, because it is the part that mattered, the part that broke them. The inner deep did not open up on the veil the moment they came in range. It did the colder thing, the thing 30,000 years of readiness had earned the right to do. It simply turned itself on, all at once, and let them see. The rings around Mars lit first, closest to them, 3 vast lattices coming awake along their whole turning length, 10,000 kilometers of armor and weapons shrugging off the dark and standing into the light. Then the hollowed moons, the 2 small magazines, unsealing their faces so that even at the veil's distance the readings must have screamed. Then sunward, the long fortified reach itself, the corridor between the worlds that we had spent an age studying with hard installations against exactly this hour. They came on, one after another, a constellation of human-built deaths kindling in sequence down the whole road to Earth, so that the veil, looking sunward expecting clutter, saw instead a wall of light deepening and deepening toward a center they could not yet see but could now finally begin to fear. And at the center, around the wet world itself, the one they had filed under nothing, the high orbits answered last and answered largest. I will not pretend I have the words for what hung in Earth's high deep by then. I served on the thin red edge of it my whole life, and I saw it only on screens. The warships there were not built to the scale of Mars's forward rings. They were built to the scale of the thing we had spent 30,000 years promising ourselves we would be ready for. Kilometers of them. Fleets that did not patrol the inner dark so much as constitute it. And they were not scrambling. They were not surprised. They had been told, 3 words in an ancient code, 2 days before, by an old man on a red world, that the road was walked, and they had simply finished the preparation they were already most of the way through, and turned to face the lane, and waited, exactly the way we on Mars had taught the whole species to wait by waiting ourselves for 30,000 years. The Veils saw all of it. There was a long silence on every channel while they saw it. I have come to think of that silence as the truest thing that happened in the whole affair. The long-held breath of an empire discovering, in the space of an hour, that a parcel it had owned and forgotten had spent the forgetting becoming something that could not be removed. When they broke the silence, they did not hail the cairn. They had stopped by then caring about the stone. They hailed the inner deep. They hailed Earth. And the grammar of the hail had changed. I read the translations as they came. There on the deep floor with the dead of the morning still warm on the surface above me. The grammar had changed from the cold certainty of the renewal into something I had never read in 30,000 years of their stone, something their language barely had the shape for, because their language had been built by a people who had never in their long history needed it. It was the grammar of a question. They were asking who we were. And the inner deep answered them. I was not in the room where the answer was decided. I was a warden on a red world, 1,100 strong at dawn and fewer by dusk, and the deciding of such things was far above my floor. But the answer came down the net to us too, because we had earned the right to hear it, and I have carried it ever since. The inner deep did not gloat. I want that recorded above all else, because it is the part that separates what we became from what the veil had always been. We had 30,000 years of held grievance, 30,000 years of being filed under nothing, 30,000 years of going down into the cold every morning to guard the stone of a people who would have removed us like weeds. And when the hour came and the weapons were live, and the empire that had claimed us hung in our sight with its graceful certainty in ruins, we did not open fire. We did not crow. We did not stage a slaughter for the satisfaction of the long memory. The inner deep sent the veil one transmission in their own cold grammar, made cold not by hatred but by the simple finality of fact, and it said this and only this: the claim is void, the lane is closed, turn and go. No threat passed the fact of the sky, no condition passed the going. We did not demand surrender because we did not need it. We did not demand reparation for the morning's dead, because the dead were ours and the meaning of their dying was not a thing the veil could pay back. We told them the door was shut, and we let them see exactly how shut, and we told them they could turn around. And then we held our fire and waited to see whether 30,000 years of an enemy's certainty could bend in a single hour, or whether we would have to break it. It bent. I will not pretend I expected it to. There was a long, terrible stretch on the deep floor where we did not know which way the unbroken claim would fall, where every gun on Mars and every ring in the sky and every warship in Earth's high deep sat live and aimed and silent, and where 1,100 of us, fewer now, waited to learn whether the morning's dead were the first of the war or the only ones. The veil held in the dark and looked at the sky we had built, and I will never know, but I think that somewhere on the bridge of that great pale length of a ship, a commander who had crossed the long road expecting to renew a 30,000-year-old claim on an empty way station was learning the thing their stone had never had the room to say, that a possession can learn to read. That the weeds on the red world had spent the whole of the forgetting becoming the one thing an empire of patient landlords had never planned for, a tenant that had grown stronger than the lease. They turned. The unbroken claim came about in the dark, slow and pale and graceful even in retreat, and the procession that had come down the lane like wealthy men crossing a field they meant to buy went back up the lane like men who had found the field grown over with something they did not have the strength to clear. They did not fire a parting shot. We did not fire a pursuing one. The standing order, 30,000 years old, refined by 10,000 wardens, did not end with annihilation, and I have been grateful for that every day since, because it meant that the last thing the inner deep did with all its terrible readiness was decline to use it. We let them go. We watched the pale length of the unbroken claim dwindle down the road it had marked, carrying its renewed and then revoked record back to whatever filed us, and we let the dark close over it, and we did not cheer. There was nothing to cheer. We had not won a battle. We had concluded a vigil. The difference is the whole of what I have been trying to say. I buried the morning's dead in the red dust 3 days later, when the sky was finally and certainly empty, when the inner deep had confirmed that the lane was clear all the way out, and that the veil's long pale shapes were truly going and not merely regrouping. We did it by hand, the old way, the way every warden has done it on that plain for 30,000 years, because some things you do not give to machines. SciFi was among them. She had asked me in the deep floor on the last night whether the latch was worth it, and I had told her it was, and then I had buried her in the ground she helped to hold, and I have never once decided whether telling her the truth that night was a kindness or a cruelty. Probably it was both. Most true things are. 1100 at dawn on the morning of contact. Fewer at the burying. I'm not going to give you the number. The number is ours, and giving it to you would make it a fact in your mouth instead of a weight in mine, and I have carried it as a weight for the rest of my years, and I intend to carry it out with me. It is enough to say that the latch held, that it drew blood before it gave, that the door behind it never had to open because the latch did its work, and that the cost of the latch's work was paid by people who knew exactly what they were buying with it and bought it anyway in the cold without illusions. That is the discipline of the thin part of the wall. I have told you I have never found its equal. I have buried most of the people who possessed it. Both of those things are true, and they do not cancel. I held the wardenship 11 more years after that morning. Then I did the thing that the long memory exists to make possible. I passed it on. I took my successor down to the deep floor, a hard young officer named Corwin Ash who had come up through the picket the ordinary way same as I had, and I showed her the cairn, and I taught her to listen to its cold sentence singing into the dark. And I taught her not to silence it, because a silenced marker tells its makers something is wrong with their property, and a singing marker tells them the field is still empty and the weeds are still weeds. I taught her the 3 words in the ancient code that mean the road is walked. I taught her that the strength of the inner deep is not separate from the holding of the latch, that there is no greatness behind the watch that does not pass through the watch first, that we are not the small part of a great thing, but the place where the great thing touches the ground. She asked me, before I left her the floor, whether the veil would come back. I told her the truth, the way I have told everyone the truth in the cold. I told her I did not know. The veil are patient the way only an empire can afford to be patient, and an empire does not forget a parcel it has lost the way it forgets a parcel it has merely owned. We had turned them once, with a sky 30,000 years in the building and a morning's dead on a red plain. Whether that turning was a door closed or a door merely held, whether the unbroken claim took our cold word back to a power that would accept it, or to a power that would simply file us under something new and harder and come again with the screen deployed, and the procession turned to a war formation, that I did not know, and could not know, and would not pretend to know to a young woman about to inherit a stone. What I told her instead was the thing I did know, the only thing 30,000 years had actually proven. I told her that whatever the veil decided, we would be ready, because we had decided long ago that being ready was not a state you achieve and then rest in, but a watch you keep and never break. The strength was in the keeping. The morning the veil turned, they did not turn because we were lucky or clever or favored. They turned because every single morning for 30,000 years, without one failure, someone on this red world had gone down into the cold and listened and confirmed the door was shut. And the unbroken length of that listening was the wall they ran into when they came to claim us. Not the guns, not the rings, not the great pale warships in Earth's high deep. Those were only the shape the listening had taken. The listening was the thing. She went down to the deep floor the next morning, the way I had, the way Corwin's successor will, the way someone will long after the last person who remembers my name has gone into the red dust beside SciFi. And the cairn sang its cold sentence into the dark, that it belonged to the veil and the veil would return, and a human being stood over it in the thin pink light and listened, and did not silence it, and was ready. That is the whole of it. 30,000 years they let the marker sing, certain it was singing to an empty field. We let it sing too. We just made sure that every morning all that long while, there was someone standing over it who could hear the song for what it was, not a claim, but an appointment. And when the appointment finally came, the veil arrived to keep it expecting a stone in an empty field, and found instead the field full, and the weeds grown into a wall, and the wall manned by a people who had read their letter and understood it and spent the whole of the forgetting getting ready to answer. They thought they had 30,000 years to come back and take what was theirs. They were 30,000 years too late to take anything at all, and the field had never once stopped watching the road.